Hey guys, welcome back to the InnerViews channel. In today's video, we're going to focus on the main reason that Arsenal is struggling against Spurs. First, we're going to look at the board, and you can see that Spurs are dropped off into more of a 4-4-1-1. In reality, they are more of a 4-2-3-1 in possession, with Bergvall just in behind Richarlison. And what we see from Arsenal is that there were no real changes to how they look to play. It was more of a 4-3-3. And what we focus on first is that midfield zone, where you see that Spurs can line up 3v3. They have Bergvall that can sit on Odegaard, and the most important thing in this game was Sarr and Bentancur's work in the midfield zone, tracking the movements of Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard, with Odegaard often pushing forward into that gap between Van de Ven and Spence. One of the reoccurring issues that Arsenal encountered here against Spurs was that they weren't getting any productivity down the right-hand side on a consistent basis, and a lot of that had to do with Spurs' discipline, with Bentancur shifting across to help out Spence and Odegaard, with Van de Ven also serving as a cover for Spence, and there were times where you even saw Bergvall dropping off deeper to help out. And from there, even with Arsenal having 3 players across that right-hand side, Spurs sometimes had 4 or 5 looking to shut down that threat. The other key factor here was that Rice was being tracked very well by Sarr, and whenever he was looking to make forward runs in beyond the midfield to join the attack and provide support for Martinelli, Sarr did a very good job of tracking those runs towards the penalty area. And even when Rice shifted out towards the wide zone, Sarr was tracking that movement, breaking up play, and ensuring that Rice couldn't provide any sort of attacking threat in the final third, or at the very least look to impact the game in the final third, as whenever he was pushing in towards those zones, there was a Spurs midfielder player on him. In the same breath, Lewis Skelly was dropping off in towards the midfield zone, and Arsenal were creating a 3-man backline in terms of their build-up, and from there they often stayed narrow. You could have Kudus shifting across, you could have Bergvall sticking towards him, and then you have Richarlison dropping off deeper to block off Odegaard, and they did a very good job of remaining in 2 compact, disciplined banks of 4, with Richarlison and Bergvall doing a very good job of dropping off into that midfield zone to help close down the space between the lines and in the pockets in the midfield area. There are examples throughout the game where you'd see Arsenal looking to break in towards that midfield zone, whether it be in the 13th minute where Lewis Skelly was able to break beyond Bergvall but then was shut down by Sarr, and from there Spurs were able to regain possession. You could look to a time where it was Odegaard looking to step forward with no pressure applied and find Odegaard in that gap between Bentancur and Sarr, but once Odegaard received the ball, Bentancur stepped in and regained possession. Or even an example minutes later where you had Richarlison dropping off on Odegaard and Bergvall ahead of Odegaard with Bentancur just ahead of for cover, and when White played the pass in towards Odegaard, Bergvall simply just stepped in and won possession for Spurs. This was a common theme throughout that game. Whenever Arsenal looked to play through that midfield zone, Odegaard and Rice didn't receive enough time to receive the ball freely, and you would see either Bentancur or Sarr stepping in to make a challenge. And then they also got help from their front too. There was an example in the second half where it was simply Odegaard receiving the ball freely beyond Bergvall and carrying it in towards the halfway circle, and you could see the Spurs attacking midfielder tracking back. The pass never came out to Rice, and he was able to track Odegaard, step in towards a challenge, and help win possession, and Spurs were able to break the other way. In many ways, this was the common theme throughout the game for Arsenal as they struggled to create in that midfield zone. They were able to ensure that Saka, White, and Odegaard couldn't create overloads down the right-hand side. They had Sarr tracking the movement of Rice for the most part, and he did a very good job of limiting his impact. And on the rare occasion when Rice was able to break beyond him, it was either Arsenal didn't have the execution to create that advantage or exploit it, or Sarr did a very good job of tracking back and limiting Rice's impact and then still finding ways to break up play. If they looked to push high and they were looking to press the left back in the midfield zone, they could have one of the front 2 joining or Kudus, and they were fine with Rice and Odegaard receiving the ball on the outside of the pitch on the touchline. Even if those 2 pushed forward, they were able to have one center back occupy Havertz and then the other look to step forward freely to close down Rice and Odegaard until Bentancur or Sarr recovered their positioning. Spurs' discipline and power in that midfield zone played a huge factor in disrupting Arsenal's build-up play, and it forced them to play a lot of long balls over the top to attempt to bypass the Spurs midfield. And while there were a few occasions where they did get the ball in the final third, they struggled to have an impact, and Spurs did a very good job of ensuring that they broke up those plays. And ultimately, this was a successful display from Spurs' front 6, and Arsenal simply had no answers for it. And even when you look to the build-up to the winner, it's a simple pass in towards Lewis Skelly, as the goalkeeper bypasses the Spurs front two, but as Skelly looks to receive the ball in turn, normally you would see the front two not tracking back, but Richarlison did a very good job of harrying the left back. He lost possession, the ball fell to Sarr, who regained possession, and from there he caught Raya off his line and was able to execute from deep long range. So as you can see, a majority of Arsenal's issues derive from Spurs' ability to negate their midfield runners with simple yet effective man marking in central zones and as disruptors and forms of cover in wide areas.